Hello and welcome to Talking to Artists. I was going to say good morning because I always say good morning, but it's actually 6 o'clock in Toronto time because we're going to be talking to an artist from Australia today, and I didn't think it was fair to ask her to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and have an interview. So just a couple of quick things. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who came out to the Riverdale Art Walk this past weekend. It was awesome. Even though the weather was kind of windy, it was so great to see so many people out. The artist community was super pumped, and it was really great to see everybody again. So thank you so much for that. The other quick thing is, as you may have seen on my Instagram, I'm headlining the Square Foot show all about abstracts. So I'm really excited about that. We have 75 awesome artists who are participating with us. So that's going to be really great. But I see that Cheryl has joined us, so I'm going to bring her right on and we can hear all about her cool stuff that she's working on. Oop, gotta put my glasses on. Cheryl. And hopefully the technology works, because that's always a challenge. Hello.
Morning.
Hi, how are you?
Well, thank you.
Good. So I gather it's pretty bright and early for you in the morning, is it?
It's 8 o'clock here. I'm at my mother's place, which is Tamworth, and I'm at the back of her house. And I have just noticed that there's frost on the ground.
Wow. That seems kind of more of a Canadian thing somehow.
I know.
Well, it's funny because yesterday we had it was about 38, 39 degrees in Toronto. With the humidex, it was up to about 45, which was just
It would have killed you. It would have killed you.
Yeah, it almost did, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So anyway,
remember we had a dreadful day. It was about 45 degrees. And I had just bought a new Mini. And I was coming back from my mum's place and we stopped in this park, and it normally has all of these flying foxes.
Oh, cool.
And I kind of wanted to take a photograph, but there were people in the park and it was 46, 48 degrees, and they were picking up, these poor animals that had expired. It was just dreadful.
Oh
Yeah,
my
it was
goodness.
and I just couldn't even take a picture of it. It was just so dreadful.
No, that
Yeah.
kind of ruins it.
Yeah, it was just awful. It was, anyway. I mean,
Yeah,
and often when I hear those high temperatures, I always think, oh my God, those poor birds.
yeah. Well, and it's interesting because we had my daughter did an exchange, so she spent 2 months in Sydney, and then we had an Australian girl come and stay with us, right? She's like, what's with this humidex thing? Like the temperature's the temperature. I'm like, no, not when you've got like 80% humidity, and it
Yeah.
feels like 45, even though the actual temperature isn't. And by
Yeah.
the end, it was just like, yeah, okay, I get that now.
Yeah.
So you're based normally in New South Wales. That's correct. Is that correct?
North of Oka. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is
All right.
about an hour up from Sydney.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And you're an oil painter, retired art teacher, but maybe you can talk about your journey, because I love the fact that your first inspiration was ballerinas, horses, and seals. I'm like, the ballerinas and the horses I get, the seals are just a little
I
unusual.
know. When I was a kid, I was going, to infant school to infant school. And the Department of Education must have purchased these reproductions of the Impressionist paintings. And so these paintings went into every school kid's room. And I just remember, you know how you'd go to one room for music, or you'd go to somewhere else for painting or craft, or you'd move around these sort of classrooms. And
Yeah.
I just remember there was Dagus's ballerinas. I think there was Cleese, you know, that Sinbad the Sailor, that was the seals.
Right.
And I remember Franz Hals, those beautiful red horses, the fourths.
Mm-hmm.
And I always remember thinking, it'd be wonderful to paint like this and to feel like this. And I suppose, and that's where the memory started. But the funny thing is I went to my daughter's school, huge amount of time later, and they still had these really old, faded reproductions on some of the walls. They had
Wow.
never thrown them away.
I'm guessing they're not quite as vibrant after, 30 years or whatever, as they would have been originally.
Yellow.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I remember, doing art history again in the olden days, where you had slides, right, of all the pieces, and you look at some of these pieces and you're like, yeah, okay, you got to memorize them and do the dates and stuff. And then I remember seeing them in the galleries and I'm like, oh my God, those slides were so old. They were so faded. it was almost pointless to
Yeah,
even study the work because it's so different from the originals.
yeah. But when back in those days, where I suppose in the 60s and the 70s, back in my time, I never really had access to coloured photographs, and even to have plates in books. And so that was really sort of special for me. And I remember a friend of the family, he purchased a Reader's Digest Greatest Paintings of the Art World when I was about 15. And to have plates that big and in
Oh
colour,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, in the context of the time, we take it for granted now that we can just, the internet's fabulous.
Well, it is interesting though because I don't know about you, but I very rarely, well, you're a more realistic painter than I am. I'm abstract, but I very rarely refer to photographs or anything when I'm painting. And I think some of that came from exactly your point, is that if I decided I wanted to paint an ocean wave, well,
Yeah.
I'm landlocked. I'm in Toronto. I don't have ocean waves. So I either have to kind of completely make them up or I've got to go and find them in a book where someone has already painted them. And that kind of feels a bit like copying, you know?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? The role of photography and how much you use it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do a bit of both. I do a lot of plein air, and I go out and I sketch, and then I come back in and I pretty much make it up too.
Well, that's the fun part, isn't it? I
Yeah,
always think, well, if you could reproduce it exactly, then why don't you just take a photograph, right? Like
yeah. I
the
mean,
point
it's
is, I
all
think, to
made up.
put your mark on it. Yeah,
Yeah. I
for
mean, like
sure.
the whole thing about life's all made up, so I think I
Yeah.
just make up my own.
Well, and that's very true. And not only is it made up, but it's also your perception of what you're experiencing too, which
Yeah,
I guess is part of the experience of producing the work and then part of
yeah,
the experience of
yeah,
someone looking at it. Yeah.
yeah.
And so how did you go from cool images that inspired you within obviously at a young age in the classroom to kind of becoming an artist then?
I always loved art, of course, going right through high school. I ended up becoming an art teacher. I was discouraged by so many people that being an artist doesn't pay the bills,
Yep.
all those sorts of things. But I think that there was a lot of, not a lot of support for much, I don't know, for a female. Because I remember even when I went to art school and I got a degree, and I remember being told that I could still scrub floors.
Oh, lovely.
So I sort of grew up in that sort of, so yeah. And so I had a teaching career. And when I retired, I suppose we spent a few years in China. When we came back,
Oh,
early 50s. And after a few years, I just went back to life drawing.
yeah.
And I felt like I actually had the space then. And then so what I was doing was I was coming up here to see my mother, and I'll walk around my mother's garden. My mother, this is winter. So
Oh,
remember that there's nothing flowering, okay? So my
I
mother
wish my winter
is,
looked like that.
but my mother is a prolific gardener.
Oh,
And so my mother has this, she had this incredible garden, and it's always full of hollyhocks and roses and
oh, beautiful. Wonderful shapes
wheelbarrows.
too, with some spiky things and
Oh
like
gosh,
it's,
everything and
yeah.
anything. Anyway, so I would come back, and when I spent time with mum, I was actually drawing and painting her garden. So I ended up with my first exhibition of my mother's garden.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's so sad though that, so many people have such great talent and they're so, and I think women especially years ago are so encouraged not to do it. And that whole thing about, not only are you never going to make any money, we're going to make sure when you go to school that you're going to have all the stereotypes in your head so
yeah,
that you're almost guaranteed not to make any money, right?
yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting, it's really interesting. And I do a little bit of teaching now, women my own age. And it's only been now for about 6 months they've been coming. If my husband comes down to take some shots at the end of the lesson, they have only just stopped being apologetic.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I keep sort of saying, it's just a bit of oil paint. It'll come off with the turps.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. Let's just enjoy our time. It doesn't have to be worth anything. There are many things that we do in life that isn't worth anything. We listen to music, we read books, we spend time with other people, we never get paid for it. So why not just think of this like that?
That's a really lovely philosophy, actually, because I think you're right. It's kind of like if I don't produce something that's perfect, somehow it's a waste of time. Versus exactly like you say, I sit in the garden for 2 hours and watch the birds, right? Like I don't get anything specifically out of it except for a really deep-seated contentment.
Yeah. So I ended up okay, so having my first exhibition, and then I needed to learn more about, I suppose, online marketing. So I actually met Stephanie, who you know, and I
Hmm.
met Stephanie whilst doing an online course, the Profit Canvas. And what's come out of that is the International Art Alliance, which, do you know about that from Stephanie?
Yes, I do. That's why I'm interviewing all of you guys, and I think it's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
fascinating. I'm just so excited to see what you guys come up with.
yeah. So
But
there's
talk about it for people that maybe missed the previous episodes.
so there's six of us, and we are working on the same painting, and we are sending it around the world. And we have a Facebook Live at now I've got to get these times right because I'm in your future. So Australian
Right.
time, it is at 5:30 in the morning, Friday, and I think it's for EST or Eastern Standard Time. It's at 3:30 in the afternoon, 3:30 p.m. And that's a
Right.
Facebook Live that you can
So
pick up.
anyone can join into that then. They can sort of come in and see what you're
Yeah,
doing.
yeah, yeah. And we're actually just about to jump into our larger works,
Yeah.
and we're all
It's
we're all finding all these excuses why we can't get them finished. They
well
end up
it
going,
yeah, I was just saying it's very interesting because I think you're about the fourth or fifth artist I've interviewed, and everyone's been really nervous about starting and about covering up someone else's work or kind of, like putting your own mark on something, but how much do you cover and especially stuff like that. Except for Rose Williams, who I interviewed last week. And she's like, oh, I'm really excited to just cover up stuff. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's good
yeah,
for you. You're
yeah,
bold.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I do a little bit more of that too. I always sort of think, oh my God, there's a white space. Oh, let's just fill it.
And so, what about your own work then? You looks like you work in. You obviously do a lot of your coastline, which are beautiful
Yep,
waterscapes, seascapes, and then florals with your water lilies and stuff.
yep.
Um,
I started doing the water lilies because of the lockdowns, and I was uncomfortable going down to the beach because I thought that somebody would rouse on me for being
yeah.
out, and so I remembered that there was a water pond at the end of the oval, and sorry, the sports oval, and there was a water
Hmm.
pond there, and it's the back end of the lagoon. So the lagoon comes in from the beach, and it comes up the highway, well, the main road, goes underneath the road, and it forms this brackish sort of lagoon. And I remembered it. It has lots of trees around it. So I was starting to go down there, and I would paint so nobody could see me.
So you're like hiding in the trees, painting the water lilies.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
And
awesome.
that way nobody would have a go at me, like, how dare you be out and how dare you be doing this? And
And was it
so I
pretty
started,
strict? So it sounds like
sorry, Kate?
it sounds like some of the restrictions were pretty strict then during COVID. Then,
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people were walking the beaches, but they weren't allowed to sort of stop and mingle.
right? Yeah, we were like that too, actually. Yeah, all the
Yeah,
you couldn't sit on the benches, so I can see why plein air painting. Obviously, you have to stay in one place. That makes sense.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I started a water lily series, and that's how that got started. And I was just going down there and painting, and it's really quite really tranquil. Whereas the beach is always windy, there's waves, there's water, there's stuff happening, I don't know, it's a lot more difficult. Well, I find for me, it's a lot more difficult to paint at because there's all this stuff happening and people and I don't know, activity.
Right. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, just by the very nature of the waves, they change every single time you look at them, right? So
yeah,
I guess
yeah,
it's a different kind of environment.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, of course. Well, I don't. Maybe of course I don't do plein air painting because I haven't really quite figured out how to do the abstract plein air painting thing yet. But I know my sister does very much, and straps these big canvases on her back and hikes up the mountain with a
wow.
36-inch panel on her back, and then does these pretty awesome plein air paintings.
So she does it in acrylic, so it would
She
have to
she
dry.
lays she lays it down, I think, in acrylic.
Okay.
No, she works in oil first. She must work in oil first. No, yeah, acrylic first, and then she does the
Yeah,
oil over top.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I was wondering how she'd get it down without oil.
Oh, I'm sure there are also some accidents too, probably that were kind of, like maybe happy little accidents that changed the composition a bit. I don't know.
Yeah, Yeah, accidentally dropped in the sand.
Yeah, I've had a couple of those too. I don't know what I was doing, but I remember when I first started, because I work with a palette knife, and I
Yeah.
don't know, I was just trying to do texture or whatever, and I don't even know what I was baking, and I grabbed these, like, I think they were like poppy seeds or whatever, and I was going to just add a few of them to see what it looked like, and they just went poof over the entire thing, and I'm like, okay, that's just way too much texture in one place. Looks like it's been fallen down upside down onto the dirt or something, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
part of the play.
yeah, yeah. And that's the nice thing about art, isn't it?
Yeah,
It
yeah. So
is.
what's your favorite thing to paint? Like,
I I just love the process. I love looking at I love going off to the art gallery. I would love to live by the art gallery. I have a plan to spend a month by every major art gallery in the world. Or
oh wow,
probably I would need 6 months and just go there every day and draw and paint my favorite artists. Well, that
yeah.
concept of studying them. Yeah. So I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
yeah.
wonderful. It's one of the things I just did Chicago One of a Kind, and one of the things that I just loved too is going to the Chicago Art Institute and just I don't know, just absorbing it. And of course, it was
Yeah.
so nice to be out in real life again too. But it was just you forget how inspirational it is to look at really beautiful works of
Yeah.
art.
And I love that concept of exploring the world as an artist, as a painter, promoting other people's work. But also, I just love how people think. And I love how it all comes out in their art. And I love asking that question, like, what were you thinking? Or what's going on here? And
Yeah.
I just find that I love that, and I think that's why I love the masters, and I like going into the art gallery, and I have favourite paintings, and I love to sit, I love to find them again when they're up. I mean,
Hmm.
as they rotate a major exhibition, and yeah, it's always I suppose I'm really fascinated how the brain works and how we come up with all this stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I love that too. And someone said to me the other day, I said, "Oh, you're a process painter." And at first I'm like, "No, no, I'm a creative painter." And I'm like, "No, actually, kind of I am because I do love that the process of kind of processing the thought concept and the tactile nature of the work and the paint. And once it's done, I'm kind of like, okay, good. It can go away somewhere else now. Someone else can own it.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many different ways to paint, and there's so many different ways to think about it. And I do that a lot with my students. It depends on through what glasses you want to look at it. In a historical sense, or in an emotional sense, or in a non-object style, or abstract, and it's
Yeah.
infinite, and you never tap out. You never
Well,
tap.
and especially with landscapes, I mean, it's kind of like in Canada, you have the classic, birch trees and the hills and the lakes and stuff like that. And yet you can have someone paint, the same scene, but it's so different each time. The
Yeah,
brushstrokes are so different. And it's one of the reasons I love doing these interviews because you really get to talk to people who are technically painting the same thing, but look so dramatically different at the end of the day.
yeah, yeah. And I suppose, like, being a teacher, I suppose a lot of the way that I taught, I could actually go through a program and I would show my students four or five different ways you can approach this subject if it was something like portraiture. And I suppose it's been really hard for me to almost find my own style, because
Yep.
I'm so used to being in a teaching, trying to accommodate the various needs and wants of the kids, the students.
Well, I think when you're teaching, I've heard this from a number of artists too, is that when you're teaching, you're also very conscious of your mark making. You're conscious of what you're doing because you're trying to explain it so that someone
Yeah.
can learn from it, which is quite different, I think, from when you normally are painting for yourself. It's much more intuitive.
That's a really good insight for me, because I often feel that I can, I feel as if that teaching part, because I have done it for so long, is probably really, yeah, what I
It,
do.
it's an, yeah, I find it interesting too because sometimes I do not since COVID really, but I do this show where there's a couple of us artists and we're painting as the show is going on, and it's quite fascinating to me that people sit and really watch you intently. I'm sure you find this with plein air too for like 20 minutes or half an hour, and then for me they're like, well, why did you put that there and why did you do that there? And especially when you're painting abstract where they don't have a structure for understanding why you're putting things in different places. It's interesting to have to force yourself also to kind of not justify it, but it kind of explain what the thought process was when it's so
Yeah,
deeply subconscious.
that's a really weird thing, and it's really hard to explain that, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because if you don't really know, um, yeah, and I make up stuff as I go along, and I get a feeling, and it's really interesting. I spend a fair bit of time with my elderly mum up here, and I can't start a painting if I'm going to come up here for a few days, because it's almost like the idea disappears down the rabbit hole and I can't get it out. I have
Yeah.
to like get my idea, then get it down, work on it. But if I stop halfway, well, that's almost like one painting. That's a painting already done. It's really weird. And then when I go back to it, it's almost like the idea's disappeared. It's like a snake or something, and I can just see the tail disappearing, and I haven't grabbed it.
I totally get you. I think because I think it's about, I talked a couple of weeks ago about being kind of in that zone, right? So when you're in the zone, it's like things are coming together and you know where it's going to go and you know what you have to do at the end of it. And you break that sort of zone trance and you can't get back there. Like I'm the same way. I need to get a certain amount, like I need to get like 80% of the composition done. And I can go in afterwards and kind of look at it and see if there's something that doesn't work, but I
Yeah.
can't stop at 20%. It just, they sit here for like months because I never know what to do to go back to them.
Yeah. And that's like a student said to me something about, I have all these unfinished paintings. And I found that really strange. I thought, how are they unfinished? They're a painting.
Mhm.
Like, unfinished? What does that mean? Is it not just a painting? Why is it unfinished? And if they've been there for a long time, aren't they? I don't know. It was a really, and yeah, I had to think about that for a while. Like, unfinished
Yeah.
painting. What do you mean?
So when you go to art galleries and stuff, do you have like a favorite artist, or do you look at different artists for different things, like for composition or for mark making or the way they do their water or?
I suppose I like down in the New South Wales Art Gallery down here. They have a lot of the impressionists, the plein air impressionists, which I love. They also have some of those huge paintings of battles, which are meters by
Hmm.
meters by meters. And oh gosh, this was a French artist, Jerome something, Bast something. And it was lovely to have a peek inside of his studio with all the armory, all the beautiful bridles of the horses, all the wonderful spears and everything that he obviously had drawn in detail, a studio full of it coming together in this massive, massive mural. And so often I go back there and I just can't believe people have that sort of energy.
Yeah, and also just how they visualize something so huge too. Like I find that like some of these big murals too, you're like, wow, it's not even just a creative process anymore. It's a huge technical process to try to figure out how do you execute it properly.
And then I have another really sad painting, and I visit it every so often, and it's got this, the great big dog, and he's, the master has died, and the dog's very silent, and that very sort of silent sort of. But I
Yeah.
mean that's always a really sort of sad one. But I don't know. I do like to go to mixed exhibitions, but I often find that I get really confused. I often prefer to go to one artist and
Hmm.
um, get involved. I find that when I go to the Archibald, which is a portrait prize, there are so many different paintings and so many different artists. It does my head in.
Well,
It's almost,
you start to not be able to really see them properly anymore. I think like you're technically seeing them, but you're not really seeing them.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I love it when the Art Gallery of Ontario here brings in these retrospectives. So you have, Turner or whatever, and I wouldn't have particularly said that Turner was an artist I was that interested in, but it's so fascinating to watch when he first started, what the progression was. And I find by the end of it, you're like, oh, I love his work now.
yep,
It's
yep,
because you understand
yep.
more about it.
I remember, I think it was in Vancouver, I seen a Monet, massive exhibition of the Monet a few years ago, and it was just magnificent,
Yeah.
mind
Yeah.
blowing, and
And do you have, like, I know, obviously in Canada with the group of seven is sort of like a religion, really, for all artists in Canada. Do you have kind of the same sort of thing in Australia where there's artists that have committed to capturing the Australian kind of landscape or vibe?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, we would. Yeah, we have Australia is really really sunny. I lived in China for a long time, and even with traveling, I don't know. I mean, if I sort of come out here in the sun, it's beautiful. I mean,
Beautiful.
it's just really our sky's really clear, and it's possibly because we don't have as many people living down here in the southern hemisphere. So what happens is that all of your air stays up where you are, and you have the majority of the population. And I actually really know, I notice it when I go China, well, when I go to Canada, the US, I don't wear my sunglasses. And the
Huh.
thing is that Australia is just so much more glary.
Hmm.
It really is. And I don't think other people really know that, how glary Australia is, because we don't have the huge amount of pollution. And so we can see, and we don't have as many particles in the air, if that makes sense.
Right. I was also wondering if you don't have the same level of, like, obviously in Toronto too, you have the 60-foot trees, which create a bit of a canopy that also seem to block some of that bright light. Like, obviously,
Yep,
it would be different
yep,
maybe in Saskatchewan or something, but
yep, yep, yep. Yeah, you do. Yeah.
so
Yeah,
does
we
your
also
painting
have a lot of,
change? I'm so
sorry,
sorry. No, no, you go.
a lot of desert painters. Yeah. However, we do not have the government support and just the support that you guys have. And talking to my friends in the International Artist Alliance is just incredible when you talk about how many galleries you have, how many
Hmm.
places that you can apply to for grants or for help, or it's just amazing. We just do not have it.
I guess
Yep.
we're spoiled.
No, it's a great way to be spoiled.
Well,
Um,
yeah, it is. I think it's good for a culture to have to embrace its culture and embrace its artists, right? And I think that,
yeah,
around the world, I think we could just do a better job of all of us remembering that and supporting the people that bring that creativity to the table. And even corporately, people are always talking about we want creativity, but they don't really understand the creative brain or how to work with creative people within a corporate environment, you know?
no. You often, I've often seen ads for a chef. We want a creative chef. No, you don't. You want someone who is disciplined, who creates the same meal, blah, 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 who can work with groups. You don't want anyone who's creative.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
yeah, I learned that in the mutual fund industry because I would have all these creative ideas and they're like, "Oh my God, you're a space cadet." I'm like, "What do you mean? Can't you follow my creative process here?" Like it seems pretty obvious. So I learned, yeah, you learn how to communicate.
yeah. So I don't, yeah. That word creative, it's an interesting concept. Yeah, how they, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. And so do you find, talking about light, do you find that your work changes if you paint in, say, Vancouver or in China versus in Australia?
Yeah, I'm sure it would. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm in China. You really couldn't see clouds, so the clouds were out and the sky wasn't blue. So
Yeah. Yeah, my son used to do tripping in Algonquin Park, and I remember he had a family came from China, and the boys were fascinated because it's the first time they'd seen blue sky. You're
yeah,
like, wow, that's a little bit
yeah,
sad.
yeah.
But
And they never get to see rainbows.
no, yeah.
And it tastes different. So the air and where you are, it tastes different. And when I first arrived, we went up to this to the top floor of the Capitol Club, which was the tallest building in Beijing, and I couldn't see the footpath below.
Wow.
And it actually tastes funny. And so when I flew back into Sydney and I could get off at the airport in Sydney, the airport we're talking about, it
In
still
the
smelled,
city.
it smelled better. It was clear and bright. It was like, oh, it just tastes better. The air tastes better.
Yeah. And there's just something about blue sky too. I don't know, like maybe because it grew up that way, but it's just like to me that's a happy day, you know?
It just doesn't seem right. And sunshine. And they didn't have any like bright sunshine because everything was diffused. The sunlight was diffused.
Hmm.
And
Well, and maybe
yeah,
that explains a lot of the paintings too seem to be very monochromatic, like especially some of the traditional. I don't know, it doesn't make sense if it's traditional, but I don't
yeah,
know. There seems to be a different color palette for sure.
yeah. And whereas I'm always seeing these huge dark shadows and these bright brights and everything's like, the dark shadow and the bright brights and all that sort of thing. So,
Yeah,
yeah, because my paintings tend to be fairly bright too. So I
very
suppose that,
dramatic.
yeah, yeah, because these huge sort of like brights and because the sun's here and then the darks where the shadows are, the contrast is always sort of huge.
Yep.
Yeah,
No, that's cool. I'd be interested. I wonder if I would change my. Well, I do know I change my color palette if I'm doing a show in another country or a different region where those colors are not really as strong, but they're still pretty strong. So I guess I don't know. I'd have a
you're
hard time
still
going
sharp.
monochromatic.
Yeah.
Sorry. And so I think that from reading your website that you started your own gallery it was just before COVID?
Yeah, I renovated part of my house. Actually,
That
my
was
father
good timing.
he passed on, and he was always he was a beekeeper, and he was an electrical engineer, but he became a beekeeper.
Oh,
And
cool.
Terry loved to build things, and he felled the timber for the floor, and he built things. And so this was the bottom floor of the house, and the sun was down there, and so we convinced him to leave. And it's about the size of a two-bedroom flat. And so we put a new flooring in, and a little kitchen, and just the way that I wanted it, and lighting, and so that we could have events and have workshops and my sort of studio. And I often think that Terry would like that, because I could imagine that he would enjoy people making things and doing things and enjoying, collecting stuff, and craftsperson, and he'd love all that. So
Yeah.
I often think that I often think about him. I think, yep, it was a good way to spend your money, Terry.
Yeah. Well, that's a lovely, I don't know, tribute to him.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah,
you
so
do
we've
class.
had a few. We have a few
Yeah.
nights. We've only had a few nights because of COVID, and I've sort of forgotten how to live in a way since COVID. I've forgotten that we can do all these things.
I know it
But I've
feels
had a few
weird.
students have work there, and we have some little classes, and but it's nice to have
Sorry.
a large space, a large comfortable space.
And so is that your painting studio as well, or is that just
Yeah.
your gallery space?
So I have one of the bedrooms is my painting studio. Then I've got a storeroom, and then I've got a large open space. I think it's about 100 square meters, 100 square feet. I don't know. About a two-bedroom unit,
Oh,
flat.
nice.
Yeah.
And is it open to the public so people can kind of come in and look at the work, or is it invitation
Um,
only?
for
Or
appointments, and sometimes I'll do a one-off Saturday or Sunday or weekend. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, I guess as things are starting to come back to normal too, that's going to potentially change the way that you kind of manage that space, I guess.
Yeah. And I hadn't really thought about it for a while because of this COVID thing. I'd sort of closed down a bit in my mind,
Yeah.
thinking that I do these sorts of things. But no,
Well,
I've got to get back into that.
it is definitely different because I just did an outdoor show with 150 artists, and it was really busy and the weather was gorgeous and stuff like that. But on one hand, it just felt a bit weird, like almost like this low grade anxiety before we started, and then as
Yeah.
we're in the middle of it, it's just like, oh, it feels normal again for the first time in 2 years. I feel like life is kind of back to the way it should be.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
We had one of those also at the surf club, and it was just amazing. And people were walking along, and they were coming in, and everybody had that feeling of, oh my God, we can actually be close to people. It was
Yeah, we
so,
could talk about our art. We can look at it non-digitally.
yeah. And isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful that art can do those sorts of things? And I always love how people will travel the world to see a piece of art, and everybody will have a comment about the Mona Lisa, or they've been to a particular art gallery, and
Yeah.
and I've seen this, and these people don't even know anything about. I mean, they're not necessarily into art, but they'll travel the world just
Yep.
to go to an art gallery.
Well, you see that I remember seeing those kind of people in the Uffizi Gallery, which is, of course, is so
Yep.
huge in Florence, and people are just like going so fast. It's like done that one, seen that one, seen that one, seen that one, and you're like, yeah, but you're not really seeing it. You're not really absorbing it. You're not really celebrating the beauty of it.
Yeah, yeah. That's a
But I guess to each his own. I guess at least they saw it.
yeah.
Some people
That's
haven't
absolutely
even seen it. Some people don't even spend the time going in. So I guess maybe we should be grateful for that.
yeah.
So what's next for you?
I've got an exhibition coming up at a local gallery, at the Gosford Gallery, in the community centre, and that's early in August. And I think it goes from about the 7th to about the 14th. So I've got to get prepared for that and get my head around that. So that's the next bit. And I'm hoping to get a book for myself of my plein air
Ooh,
paintings of the local area, getting that together for the rest of the year. Or, yeah, that'll be a bit of a project. Yeah.
that sounds pretty fascinating, though. So is that a combination of exploring the space and having the paintings that represents that sort of that space, almost like a tour of the neighborhood?
Yeah, 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 yeah. One painting, one page, details, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Yeah,
Oh, that sounds great.
yeah. And I don't have to publish it. I mean, that's fine. Just for me. See how I go with it. Like, just starting the steps.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
actually had my painting scanned with a flatbed scanner. I had 6 of them done, and I'm thinking about prints, but I don't know. I don't know about prints. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. It's funny because I just went to visit a friend of mine's place in Hamilton, and she has a pretty large print process, and she sells a lot of prints. And it's pretty awesome to kind of just be able to see these huge, 7 foot by 8 foot prints on the wall. And there's something about that you kind of go, yeah, I could never paint that big because I paint on panel, so it's just way too
Wow.
heavy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. It's neat that it completely surrounds you, in a way that an actual painting can't do.
But I almost feel like I don't have enough space for it. I have enough space to do my own painting and to do a bit of marketing. I just don't feel like I've got the brain
Yeah.
power. It just seems too much for me. For me.
You need to find someone who'll do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That whole outsourcing the stuff that you don't necessarily want to do, but you probably should from a business point of view. And do you sell digitally? Like, do you sell online, or how do you use your social media
Um,
and your digital presence?
I do have a website, but just trying to get out of this sun. I do have a website. I seem to sort of sell more on Blue Thumb, which is a commercial type website.
Oh,
And I don't know, for some reason, if I just seem to have more hits on there, and I'm not
so
really
is
sure.
that like an art aggregator site, or I
I
haven't heard
think,
of Blue Thumb.
yeah, I think so. So there's many artists on it, and I seem to just get more hits, and people buy my paintings. That seems to be the biggest source. Plus, in person, I've
Mhm.
worked out that people seem to be they've got used to me now.
Why are you weird and quirky and they had to get used to you?
But you have to get used to you, or they have to know you.
Yeah, well, I think certainly it helps. I mean, I certainly find too. I'm really happy to do the outdoor shows because I think
Yeah,
you can build a personal, authentic connection with people that are just, it's harder to do online for sure.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that's sort of happening with me anyway. That's, yeah, just starting. I had somebody come into the art walk, and she said to her husband, well, which one do you want? And he said, oh, I don't mind, and he just paid me. There you go.
Well, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, said something. He said, you missed out last time on one of Cheryl's works. You better get it now. There you go. And I thought, wow, that's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. But it's funny how often that happens too, where people will see a work at an outdoor show or something and they'll contact you, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later. It's like, oh, I'm ready to buy that piece. I'm like, yeah, it's gone. Like, the
Yeah.
stuff doesn't hang around for months, right? The whole point is to sell it and get it out the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that sounds awesome.
Yeah. It's lovely talking
Well,
to you.
yeah, it's been lovely talking to you too. I've really appreciated it. I love the rambling kind of regarding some kind of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited to see what you guys come up with your collaboration because I think that's just a very brave and fascinating process you guys are doing there.
It is, isn't it? So I might see you next year in person.
Oh, awesome. So you're coming to Toronto, are you?
Well, if the show is over in Toronto, I'll be over there.
Yeah. Well, I hope it is then because I would really love to see it. I just think I love the whole idea, the concept of that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Appreciate you getting up early in the morning with the frost on the ground to talk to me.
Thanks.
And next week, we're interviewing Julie Brayton, who's another one of your
Lovely.
Artist
Lovely.
Alliance artists. So
Thank
I'm
you
looking
so
forward
much.
to that
And I really
too.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Bye.
All right. Bye bye.